Hey, we're listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host Andy,
I'm your co-host, Josh.
and today we're joined by the writer and director of Bundy Manor, Alex Watson. Welcome to the show, Watson.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. And I'm really excited to jump into to this um with you because Bundy Manor is such a unique film that it feels a little bit like nostalgic. Like to me, there are Saw vibes here. Andy, I don't know if you felt this way or if you've ever even seen this movie, but Nicolas Cage did this movie back in '99 called 8 mm,
Uh-huh.
where him and a young punk blue hair Joaquin Phoenix pre-Gladiator basically like scour the snuff markets to kind of like test the legitimacy of this video. And I was like rewatching it in preparation today, and I was like, man, I was like, a lot of just the way that this movie is framed feels like snuff a little bit.
Sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I've heard of that one. I've actually never seen it before. But it's the fact that you bring all that up. I've literally wrote in my notes that watching Bundy Manor, like in the best way possible, it felt almost genreless, where you were just kind of playing in a lot of different types of horror genres.
Yeah.
So, Watson, I was actually curious, just like what your inspirations were behind this one.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing with it, is like I actually grew up very religious. I grew up from Utah and I was raised very Mormon. So I think a lot of the religious undertones come from that and just kind of some of the trauma that I've had to deal with there. And then, as far as the 80s, I just some of my very first horror movies I ever started watching were 80s movies. In fact, anytime someone comes up to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to start getting into horror movies," 80s horror movies is usually what I start with, just because I feel like it's a nice gateway into, other movies. And so some big inspirations with Bundy Manor um definitely have to come from, I mean, Halloween is like my favorite horror movie of all time. It was one of the first slashers I ever watched. And again, I was a little Mormon boy, and so it still terrified me because I was just like, hey, this dude could be lurking in my backyard. Like, I know eventually they gave him supernatural stuff and devil and all that stuff, but like the first movie was just like, no, he's just insane. And so definitely some undertones with that. Um, and then let's see, what are other some good inspirations? I love thrillers and I love movies that take horror, but they put story first. And so a lot of Jordan Peele's movies, um, definitely, like, I feel like there's jump scares in his movies, but they're not to like outpace the movie or not to outpace the story. Is that making any sense of what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and and maybe that's why it feels like it's not, it's a horror movie, but I would say, I just in any movie I make, I always or write, uh I always try and just like, hey, the story needs to be good and scares come later, or torture comes later. That's weird to say. That's a weird sentence. um
I feel like with this movie too, like I like I said, I rewatched it in preparation for tonight's interview. And I,
cool.
I think that like for me as the director and programmer of the festival, like I
I'm
had
so
such like
excited, by the way. I'm so excited. We're so close to the festival. I'm so excited.
yeah, if you guys are listening to this, this will be dropping the day of the Virginia premiere for this one.
Nice. That's cool.
Which I'm really excited about. I think this movie just has a lot of fun that like it offers the festival goers. But I think for me, like the thing that like stands out to me every time I watch this movie is I am pulling up my notes is the performance of Walter Meckham, who
Yeah.
plays our protagonist, antagonist, depending on how you look at it. And his performance is just so dang commanding on the
Yeah.
screen. Like his monologue and like the very like the climax of this movie like gives me chills like even watching
Hmm.
it on a second time.
Yeah, and he was someone who, like, I've worked with him some of my very first short films. He was one of the first people to come and like audition for back in my early 20s. And like as I would create stuff, he would just be a part of it. And then I watched a documentary, it might still be on Netflix. It's like I always forget the name and I gotta remember, but it's basically a documentary that highlights like haunted houses that like people build in their backyards, and like haunted houses that maybe push it too far. And that's kind of how I started, like the seed of the idea started happening, and Walter was just like one of the first people I thought of. um and I think what's really cool about his character is that he, he doesn't have social cues, and yet he's trying to be as charming as possible. And he's misleading a lot of people, and trying not to give too much away, I guess, but he can come off as funny at times. And I really wanted to push that because I Walter is already a really nice, genuine guy in real life, but I think he brought this level to the character of also just being funny. And yes, he is torturing people at the time, so you laugh, but then you're like, "Ooh, should I be laughing at this guy?" um, but yeah, and then I agree. I think his monologue at the end, uh, and the no surprise, but the ending was the hardest thing we had to shoot. And I just can't believe his performance, because there was so many takes and so many, coverage and all this stuff. And he was just, yeah, he did so great. So,
Yeah, he like by giving him that level of charmingness really did like just disarm you as a viewer for the whole time because
mhm,
we're not giving him too much away in the movie here, but there is a couple of twists and turns where you're not really sure who you're siding with, who you're believing. And
mhm.
yeah, I think it could have all almost fallen apart if you didn't have the right person in that role to be able to disarm you with his charm while also being able to scare you in a whole nother scene.
Yeah.
It was almost like, not to put it at the highest of pedestals, but like I was thinking Psycho a little bit. I was thinking Norman Bates, like the way, not that he's charming, but it's just like you don't think he can be violent, and then when it does
Right.
happen, it's surprising because you've
And,
already been disarmed by this person.
right. And, like I said, I'm from Utah, and one of our biggest serial killers, we've had a few serial killers in Utah, but one of the biggest is Ted Bundy. And, a big reason why it's called Bundy Manor is that, and we don't really like, I, I didn't really want to like push this too hard with the movie, because I wanted the audience to just kind of figure that out on their own. He is very modeled after Ted Bundy, like where he's wearing same shirts. There's a lot of the same vehicles we found. There's a lot of, and one big thing that he was really known for, and he was very charming, and just no one like when he first was captured and went to jail, like people would write letters to the police office being like, you have the wrong guy. And it's like, hmm. Nope, no, they didn't. So yeah.
That's cool. I could definitely see the parallels as you say it now. I don't think I know too much about Bundy, like just facts off
Mm.
my head, but that's a great like just level of Easter eggs to put in for people to watch it a second time.
Yep,
That's a cool idea.
absolutely.
I'll be honest, I didn't catch it, but that's really cool. It's in there.
Yeah, it wasn't really meant to catch it. I think yeah, people, people will watch it, and then I think a lot of people they always ask me, why is it called Bundy Manor? And it just gives me a chance to be like, this is why. And then it's like, oh, cool.
Yeah, better
So
answer than it sounds cool,
yeah, it also does sound cool, but
It
yeah.
does, but it's a good
Yeah.
it's a good answer for interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I caught it. I picked up on the first time I watched it because I am a basic white chick and listen to true crime podcasts
Hell yeah.
probably way more than I should. And I've watched the serial killer documentaries, Bundy tapes and so on and so
Yeah.
forth. And you could definitely see that like Rob is clearly modeled after this. this film, I think what really like drew me in about it is kind of it's both this like conventional like style of storytelling, but yet also at the same time like it takes these like risks and does these like really experimental type of camera work where you're kind of getting your look into the haunt, but also at the same time you're getting these like social media cues. What was like the most like challenging thing in terms of like lighting and kind of like getting those a little bit more like riskier like experimental shots just right?
Yeah. Well, first, yeah, thanks for saying that. It again, it took a very talented cast and crew. And we were very lucky to have some really talented, our DP Denver was so awesome, and Roman, our gaffer, just like really brought it. And our sound person, um, and we kickstarted this and was made for a very low budget. I think sometimes it shows that, but there's some parts in it that I'm like, I am so proud of that. I don't think it has any business looking as good as it does. And I think a big key was, the big reason why I wanted those other shots is I love mixed media. I I don't know. I love like VHS stuff, and we have a lot of that happening throughout the film too. I think it was just important also to see Bundy Manor through um his eyes, Rob's eyes, the main antagonist, because it brought it to a whole other level. You know what I mean? When like we were there, we're Rob as he's torturing people or as he's watching it happen, right? And he's getting this sick enjoyment from it. And I think it doesn't get as across as and we don't even see him, but the fact that he's like, you can hear his groans and his excitement and his like, dunk him again or do this, or there's a moment where he takes a selfie with one of his victims. And I've just always liked that. And social media, like I do that. I work a lot in social media, and in fact our next movie, Demonetize, really plays into that. But we're talking about Bundy Manor. So yeah, but you're right. It was really challenging because when you're shooting on an iPhone, lighting is really tricky, and when you're shooting POV in a very dark location, like it's just, yeah, and it's all a matter of I just have learned. Basically, Bundy turned into a masterclass of lighting for me because I was unaware of how much difference it makes, and it really does. It's just, yeah. So shout out to the very talented team. We were very lucky to have them on this project. So
Yeah, I want to give them a shout out too because I always pay attention to lighting and stuff. I'm a sound guy myself, but I work
nice.
I within all the apartments constantly, and
Hmm.
by shooting with the lack of light in those like torture scenes, I thought it worked perfectly because it moved into like snuff film territory, and that
Mm.
just to me that seemed like the kind of stuff Bob would be kind of aping in his film. So
Hmm.
it's almost like it was like his stylistic choice of like we're gonna shoot in a camcorder in this little light. So it not only like worked for in the moment, but in the story as well. And then
Yeah.
earlier when you said, about the budget and like you can see it at times, there were there were times where I saw the opposite, where I don't know if you just had a lot of great locations, but when watching, a good amount of independent films, I feel like I don't see this many side characters. Like you guys casted a
Mm.
lot of different roles. And then
Hmm.
even things as simple as shooting in that one supermarket or whatever that was, a convenience store
Yeah.
supermarket, that store. I was just like, this just seems, usually it's a lot of corners and places that we kind of have a room when you're doing an independent film. So I wanted to
Yeah.
just commend you guys on that. Where I don't know what kind of access you had to things, but I thought you used the space and just built the world really well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we shot in a little town called Cedar City. And again, it was in Utah. So the main Bundy Manor location was filmed in a theater that my friends owned. So I did have access to that, but all the other locations we just had to go. And we went like a couple weeks earlier for prep, and I really wanted to shoot in that store. because like, oh, it's just so retro, and just, it was literally built in like the 1930s originally, and was actually like a legit soda shop, and it still is a soda shop. And yeah, luckily luckily we got that location. And the only stipulation is, because we had to shoot it on a Sunday, we had to do it after church. That was the only stipulation. So we waited until after church and went and shot that scene.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, I think one of the things that, like I said, specifically, because I think like Andy coming from like a more technical background in film, like, and me coming from a more I feel like critical role, being one of the film critics we have on staff here, is like one of the things that I feel like Bundy like does. And I remember this the first time I watched it, and Andy, I don't know if you felt this way, but you get like sucked in within like the first like 5-10 minutes before you even meet the family. You just go through this like exploration of what Bundy Manor is. And I remember the first time sitting down to watch it, and I was like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And I like ran my mouse over the thing, and I was like, and we're just getting started. Um, can you guys, being a podcast that talks about mental health, and clearly this movie, I feel like talking about the mental health journeys of some of these characters definitely kind of like opens doors for spoilers. So we'll talk about that at the festival. But with this film in particular, can you talk about the pushing the mental health of some of the like the side characters going through the Bundy Manor?
Yeah. So, you know, I so yeah, when I mentioned that I started to hear about these extreme haunted houses,
I think
I
they're called
kind
haunts,
of
actually.
yeah, there you go. Got him.
I was
Yeah.
waiting for someone to do that.
Nice. I appreciate that. Again, very fun running joke.
Yeah.
But yeah, they, you know, and I really wanted to try and do it the best I could. So I actually joined a lot of like private Facebook groups that like were either fans of these, or I was on both sides. They were obsessed with them, but then there's some Facebook groups and things where they are exposing them. And some of them are safe. I'm not trying to say that all extreme haunted haunts are bad. Like they have some good limits and stuff, but um some of these, basically what I started to learn, and I ended up conducting interviews before I wrote the script to make sure I wasn't being too disrespectful. But what I started to learn is that people would watch videos of others going through the haunt, and nothing they could watch could prepare them for how it would actually be if they were in it. Does that make sense? Like they're
Yeah.
thinking, oh, they're going to pour water on me and they're going to do this and that, but it really had a traumatic toll on them. And again, yeah, we'll be careful to avoid spoilers, just because come watch the movie. It's apparently happening today, so come watch it. But to be very brief, the I have had some real big mental health. I actually, right before literally like a month before I started writing the script, or the outline of it, I had a panic attack. And I never had a panic attack. I was an anxious kid my whole life and dealt with anxiety. I didn't know that's what it was called at the time. Again, I was just told to pray and it will go away. But I actually had my first panic attack, yeah, right before it. And seeing how, and my panic attack was simply triggered by just being too overworked, and by talking with other people about how they would have panic attacks during these, and when you can't breathe and you can't see, or literally you're getting your teeth pulled. That's not just from my movie. That was literally taken from an extreme haunted house that we found that actually does that. And you can't nothing can mentally prepare you for what it's like. And there's a lot of people who suffer from the PTSD from going through these haunts, and not everyone is prepared for it. So I wanted to be respectful of that, and also adding my own you know, perspective of, then I went through therapy, and like I didn't really want to because I thought that made me weak, and like that's not what it at all, and so again, that has to deal heavily with the main character, so come see it. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question. I could probably talk a lot about that, but we can definitely wait to go heavy at the festival.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in real quick because like
Please.
I've I didn't I didn't know like haunts like this like actually existed. And I'm sure there is like a laundry list of contracts and waiver forms you have to sign
Yeah, we
to
even have a
like.
scene in the film where and that's what they do, right? Is they have it on their phones and stuff, but it is miles long, right? Like what you're saying. But
And
they
like
Mhm.
like I've only like I've obviously like I originally before I moved to Virginia I lived in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania famously has the Field of Screams,
Mm,
and Field of Screams is kind of something like that. It's basically you walk through a horror movie. It's like the best way I could describe it if you don't
gotcha.
know what it is. And like I being a huge horror fan, I really found those to be like really boring.
Hmm.
So like I've never actually like gone back to anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, I don't know if you have any experience like that or not, but
Not with
yeah.
not with like real deal haunts. Like I feel like I've known about these. This isn't horror related at all, but the show Nathan For You did kind of a funny episode
I
on
love
making a
Nathan for
haunt.
you.
Did you see the episode where he makes the scariest haunted house of all time?
Yeah, where it's a virus or something.
Yeah. I thought of
Good.
that. Well,
It's
he
good.
makes you think that you got actually sick while you're in the haunted house, and
Yeah.
you're in a real ambulance and and all this.
Yeah.
I have no real experiences, but I don't know if I'm just maybe more of a wuss, but I to jump off what you said, Watson, about how you think you're as prepared as you can be before you go into one of these things. When I went to Universal Studios Horror Nights, which is very tame. It's not a haunt by any means. It's haunted houses, but they
Mm-hmm.
had one based on Halloween 4, and I've seen all the Halloween movies 1,000 times. It scared me as a child, but truthfully, I haven't been scared by Michael Myers in 20 years. I'd like to watch him, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not actually scared. I
Sure.
was walking through that house, and like the actor who was like 4 inches taller than me was standing over me holding that knife and that mask. I kind of turned into a little kid, and I got real scared, and like it
Yeah.
made me feel
Yeah.
like I was 6 again watching Halloween. And like that's
Yeah.
just a haunted house, and that affected me to that. Like I was like, we gotta get out of here. I'm so scared. And then they had little girls playing, Jamie at the end of the movie with the clown mask and
Mm.
the knife, so you're getting chased by these little girls. So yeah, I could totally get what you're saying, where it's like all these people are like, it's gonna be fun, and but they obviously weren't pulling teeth or waterboarding me or anything like like
Yeah.
these haunts do.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, and I don't want to equate it. I'm not saying this is necessarily super similar, right? But I feel like I've had a lot of friends growing up who like served in like wars and actual wars, and their only experience was like Call of Duty or watching Saving Private Ryan. But the thing is, nothing can prepare you until you're actually in the front lines, right? And I'm not saying that these haunted houses are like being in the front lines. It's just another example of your brain can't really understand it until you're through it. And some people have a great time. It's consensual and they do it and it's a great high for them. But at what risk of like severely scarring people, So it's kind of, I don't know. It's an interesting topic to bring up. One person at a festival in San Francisco asked why I was such a prude. and like, why am I raining on people's fun? And I'm like, no, it's not that. I go to Halloween Horror Nights every night, and like I did like kind of do, it was very light, but I did kind of do like an extreme haunted house before writing the movie. But again, yeah, it's not, I'm not trying to rain on anyone's parade, or I'm not trying to, I just think there's a discussion to be had about leaving people scarred. And not even just that, the movie tackles that obviously, but then it kind of just talks about therapy in general, and just kind of talks about why we as a society sometimes don't take it seriously. Like, why can't we take it as seriously as going to the doctor, And again, I am getting a little spoilery, but yeah.
Well, to bring it back to like the haunt, like, you brought the fact of like, knowing that like someone also had pulled a tooth out. Like, I don't care how many like movies or anything I watch, like nothing is going to prepare me to have a part of me ripped out of me.
Yeah.
And like that scene in particular that is in the movie is like it's very jarring. And like, though, even the way that like Rob sets like certain sequences up in this movie, especially the way that this movie opens up with the three people on their knees and they have the bags over their head, and it's this very like, it's such an aggressive thing. And like, whether you've seen something to the extent of Bundy Manor or not, I think that this movie does speak volumes about the long lasting mental health effects that something like this experience, because trauma comes in so many different shapes and sizes, and we try and think when someone brings up PTSD, they automatically, oh, that's just for soldiers who have been to war. Well, that's not. That's for people that have gone through haunts. That's for people that have been molested or sexually assaulted or raped, or that have been held at knife point, or had a gun point in their face. Like, there's so many different scenarios for what trauma does, and there's so many different responses. And like, there's a great sequence in this movie. It doesn't spoil anything, but our character Eric, who is our protagonist, he is the father of the film. He ends up he's a journalist, and so he's like trying to do this piece on Bundy Manor. And so he finds people that have like gone through the haunt, and he asks them for their reaction. And one girl kind of gives the same enthusiastic response that you see at the beginning of the movie. And then she kind of goes, but oh, wait, there's actually like, I haven't been able to sleep since, I've been able to eat since. And you're kind of like getting to see like both sides of that, to where like an experience like this, it is exhilarating, but also at the same time, if it's not properly dealt with, you are also opening yourself up to a can of demons at the same time.
Right. Yeah, and another big thing is like, we need time to process things. Like, one thing that these haunts would use to attack people who say that they have PSD is they'd say, oh, well, look at this video I have. As soon as I was done torturing you, you're, super happy and like giving me a high five that you did it. Like, what do you mean you have PTSD? But it's like, no, our brains need time to like really go through what we went through. And like it's not something that's just like, oh, now I have PTSD or oh, now I have a panic attack. Like it's a process that happens over a period of time. And I think as humans, we don't like that. I think as humans, we want instant gratification or we want instant, results. But the truth is, yeah, we don't do that. So we might be okay with something at first just because our brain is in shock of what just happened. But, we need to also be okay with people who, after the experience, can actually realize because, there's a lot of stories out there where in the moment they didn't realize they were being, tortured, or, we could even go as far as to say, abused or harassed, or, in the moment they don't feel like that. But then once they're out of that element, they do feel and realize, oh, wow, like, yes, you know, I was abused. So,
Yeah, and I think that ties into the whole therapy angle where it's like, you know, not that you necessarily always need therapy to deal with something, but a lot of people can just put something away and just be like, oh
mhm.
no, I got it. And then, but in reality, it's like you need some sort of outlet to either someone to confide in or just somewhere to really process these thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I was so excited to submit to your festival. It was one of the ones that came up that I was just like, this movie actually seems to, to fit pretty nicely into your programming. And so I really appreciate you watching it and taking the time to allow it to be seen. And it's going to be really fun to get over there. I've never been in Virginia or anything over there, so it's going to be dope.
Dope. Yeah.
So,
Watson is going to be joining us in person, but of course, if you guys are hearing this, you guys missed him. He wasn't at the festival, or maybe you missed it. Maybe you met him at the festival. You gave him a high
yeah,
five, gave him a hug.
yeah.
This movie, I'm so excited to watch this movie with the crowd because this movie, like, I walked away from this movie and I was like, man, I know the audience for our festival, and I was like, this is a crowd pleaser, like
Oh, cool.
instantly, like this is just gonna like win over the audience, and they're just gonna have so much fun with this, and
Sweet.
I was just yeah, absolutely. So I
I'm
feel like
pumped.
before we jump into anything deeper,
Yeah.
Andy, take us away. What are we talking about tonight?
We are going to continue the Evil Dead train, and we're going with Army of Darkness, or
Ooh.
as the opening credits call, Ash versus the Army of Darkness. And I can't wait to see how we tie this one to mental health, Josh, because this is one silly ass movie.
Yeah, this movie is very interesting to tie into mental health, so I am also curious to see how we'll tie it in, but it'll be there. And so what's everyone's like relationship with this movie in terms of like where it stands in the grand scheme of the franchise?
Why don't you go ahead first, Watson?
I mean, yeah, Evil Dead is huge for me. Like I love all the Evil Deads. Um I love the TV series. I am so pumped for the new movie that's about to come out. I'm excited for the other remake. Yeah, it's really good. I would say Army of Darkness is. I mean, for me, I like the second one. That's my favorite for sure. But then Army of Darkness is just. It's on such a whole nother level because I would never expect it to go that way. Like taking zombies into the Middle Ages. I mean, they're deadites, sorry, but taking that to the Middle Ages is so fun, and just batshit crazy. And like, I mean, you love Ash, right? Put him in any situation, and he's just gonna be such a good time. So that's where about it stands for me. Is that it'd probably be Evil Dead 2, then Army of Darkness, personally. Not that it's a bad movie; it's a great movie.
Yeah. Um, as we've been talking about in this series, following all these movies, the Evil Deads were such a staple of my teenage years, which is, I think, such a great time to get into these. So
Hmm.
at the time, Army of Darkness might have even been my favorite for a lot of years. I mean, just
Nice.
I even by the time I saw it in my life, I hadn't even been introduced to that many like of these just kind of like brashy, over the top, uh, super like heroes who are just spouting one-liners, like they're borderline not even people at this point because he's just there to look cool, or either look cool or look silly, which is why it's so awesome.
Hmm.
So yeah, I always loved this one. I still do to this day. Having rewatched it this time though, I realized I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I've been talking about it in the past episodes too. I'm also a real big fan of the TV show, and I feel like the TV show is like very close in tone to this movie a lot of the times.
Hmm.
So because I'm such a big fan of the modern show now, it's like it's almost like quaint going back to this one.
Sure.
But yeah, I've called the first two. I've called this whole series just Sam Raimi's kind of sandbox where he gets to just play with all his different toys and try effects he's always wanted to try and different things. So even though this one lacks almost all the horror that was present in the first movie, it's
Hmm.
just a blast for me. So I can never really disparage it, but it is, oh, it's silly. It's one of the silliest movies ever. How about you, Josh?
So as I established in our last episode, I feel like Evil Dead 2 is kind of overhyped a little bit for me. I enjoy it. I think it's a fine movie, but I remember the first time going through this because I didn't see this series until probably 2 years ago. I saw it during quarantine. And I remember watching Army of Darkness for the first time and just being like so thoroughly entertained. It was This movie just was like such a highlight of the franchise for me. And I'm starting to like kind of see where Andy's talking about like now about how like I think we established this in the first episode, The Evil Dead, is like every film feels so vastly different than the one that preceded it.
Very true.
And I love in this one, and like I didn't pay attention to it until like Andy put that on my like radar. But you see like even the way that they set up kind of the in case you missed it, kind of like recap in the beginning of this movie. I like it's still like even through the eyes of like Ash in 1300 AD, like it still feels so completely different than Evil Dead 2. And I think that's really what makes this film like stand the test of time is that like it stands up against other films like Princess Bride and like Mighty Python and the Holy Grail, where you're taking these like medieval setting and you're just kind of going like to absolutely like crazy, like just bonkers with it. And I really loved, I just absolutely adore this movie so much so. And I was trying to before we recorded tonight. I got the Scream Factory re-release earlier this year, and it has this cut, like the theatrical cut, the international cut, the director's cut, and there's a like a 90-minute documentary making of. I was trying to get all of that stuff in, and
Oh,
I just
that's
ran
cool.
out. I just ran out of time. So
Yeah.
I'm like really like anxious to like dig into the Scream Factory, especially after watching this movie this past weekend.
I'm happy you did that because I have the plain Jane DVD and it barely has any features. So I'm the one who's been watching the commentaries and stuff getting ready, but this is the one I don't have as much info, so I'm happy to let you shoot some thoughts
Oh,
over it.
no, I did not get it. But I can tell you, I don't know if you guys knew this. Originally the original title that they pitched to Universal was not Army of Darkness. It was actually Medieval Dead. So it was
Yeah.
supposed to be like a spin.
I
That's
did know
fun.
that. I do kind of still to this day. I kind of wish it was called that, but I think it had something to do with the weird legal rights. Like that's why they're always refilming the
Yeah.
beginnings of the past movie
Yeah,
because they
because
never have the rights to it.
Universal, right. I think Universal made this one and then I can't remember who made the other ones originally, but that's the reason why they can't really reference it in the TV show either. Like they make very slight references, but yeah, you would think it would be a pretty big topic of conversation to talk about going back to medieval times. But yeah, he doesn't mention it a lot in the TV show.
So actually it has nothing to do with the rights. It's actually
Oh.
capitalism, if you will, because uh Renaissance pictures like also like had a hand in making Army of Darkness. But
Mhm.
from what I could find is that Universal didn't actually like wanted to associate with those movies because they were low budget independent movies.
Oh, interesting.
So they thought by putting like if they put Evil Dead in the title, it would kind of limit who'd want to go see this.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've
Interesting.
never seen a lot of the promotional material for this, but was it sold as like a traditional action adventure? And then when people got there, they were like looking each other in the eyes and doing percentage gags and shit.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm
That's
so
interesting.
curious.
It's funny because now I just feel like Universal's been taking a little more. Like it's funny that they did that back then, but now they've come out with like Megan and a bunch of like Cocaine Bear and like a lot of these like really
Yeah,
weird movies that I don't never thought Universal would do. So it's interesting that they're kind of and hey,
and
they're making their money back. So
yeah, and they're in charge of the Chucky series, which is like
oh, true.
the opposite thought of this, where it's like that's like 30-year legacy into a TV show as opposed to being like, well, no, we don't want to do it.
Mm,
But things, the people in charge change constantly, so you never know who's making the decisions.
yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, even looking at it from like I mean, because you have to think that like even looking at it from like an independent like production, like I mean, they did a lot on such a small minute budget as we've talked about in the first two films, the first two episodes of the series is, but like then you get here and it's just like you mentioned about how it's like Raimi's like sandbox this series, and this film's just feels like his sandbox, like they just dumped acid in this entire thing, and this is what came out.
I don't
But
know.
it's
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say they pulled off having a very big budget and still somehow making a giant movie that feels like it was still made by a group of friends. Like even though obviously
Yeah.
I couldn't pull these special effects off, I still kind of feel like if you work hard enough, like yeah, I see how they did it, and it's such a charm to these first to the series. Like it just always feels like buddies making a movie.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
But I think it's interesting too, is because like, what is it, a year or two after this, Kevin Smith gives us Clerks, and it really shows you the capability of what the landscape of independent films could do. And so now you have studios like Neon and like A24 and IFC and even Blumhouse that are putting out these films that like don't take a lot of money to make, would for the most part be very considerate of like an independent budget, but you can definitely see like the limitations. Whereas like there's kind of almost this like toxicity around the words independent cinema back in the 80s and the 90s, um, especially with like the direct to video market as well. Because you know I don't know how you guys feel about it. Some of the cult classics in the genre is are not worthy of that status, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and it's just so silly to like discredit something, and I think people are getting a little bit better now, but like, yeah, it just seems so silly to discredit something because it wasn't given a prop like a ton of budget, like, and maybe that's the why some studios have been thriving, like A24, where they have been putting a good chunk of change into these like insane crazy movies. um yeah, but like it's so interesting too because some of their most biggest franchises, and obviously especially horror, all came from very low budgets for the most part. Like it almost seems like the more money you put into something, well, but then I guess you get Avatar, but I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that's not about horror, but I don't know. I think horror thrives in having less money. I mean, I hope people get compensated what they're worth, but and hopefully if they pay them low to make the movie, they get stuff off the back end if it goes crazy. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
I mean, Sam Raimi is one of the most interesting stories of it because you literally can watch the cheapest movie ever made, and then all of a sudden he's doing Spider-Man, and then 20 years after that doing Doctor Strange. So it is pretty crazy to watch just the capabilities of independent cinema, just like in terms of the career growth that could possibly come out of it. But
Mhm.
to tie it back to just how fun this movie is, do you guys have like a favorite sequence or just like scene or anything like that?
I mean, the two that stick out to me is like, and it's so funny because I have friends all the time when I bring up Evil Dead, they're always like, and I mention Evil Dead 2 is my favorite. They're like, "Oh yeah, I love, this is my boomstick." And I'm like, "Oh no, that's actually,
Yeah,
Army of Darkness." And he's like, "Oh, I love it when like Evil Ash shows up." It's like,
yeah.
"Actually, that's Army of Darkness." So both are like my favorite parts. Like some of the best one-liners. I still think Clerks 2. Wow, now look what you got me doing. Evil Dead 2 is my favorite, but yeah, some of the best one-liners are in there. Yeah, the ending scene is so fun, where the Army of Darkness is, and they fight that whole war. Very cool. I love that stuff, and a lot of practical stuff because yeah, they had to.
Yeah, which I don't know if either of you guys knew this. Every time I've seen this movie, I've always thought this was the Deadite captain. I always thought that it was just Bruce Campbell in like makeup, because like from like a storytelling perspective, it makes sense because like it looks like, it's evil Ash
Yeah.
comes back to life. Actually
Mhm.
played by Bill Moseley.
Wow.
Oh, really? From
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw 2, right?
Yeah, Texas Chainsaw
Uh,
Massacre 2, House of Thousand Corpses. So I was
wow.
like, man,
I never
that's
would have guessed that. That's cool.
no.
Yeah,
Like
no, I wouldn't guess that either.
I think
So
it's just
cool.
a testament to the makeup of this movie.
Oh my God,
Um,
yeah.
but like Andy, to your point, I think one probably two of my favorite moments are when he grows the eyeball. Like the eyeball looks
Oh my God. I still don't
so
really know what it
gorgeous.
is. I
So
still
good.
like it doesn't look like a human eyeball. Like I don't know what it is to this day.
That scene, and then when he gets to the Necronomicon, and he's like trying to figure out which one is the one that he needs, and you kind of
Oh
just
yeah.
like get these like alternative versions of what the Necronomicon could be.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
whole sequence, just from a physical comedy standpoint. I mean, we talked about it last episode with the hand sequence, but like that was such a next level of just even just like his comedic chops of like the one book would bite him, and then he'd be like, ah, like looking over at it. Yeah, Bruce Campbell is just so good. For me, it's
Yeah.
the eyeball scene, sure, but that whole sequence with the little ashes, I just thought it was so
Oh,
good. The
yeah.
first time I saw it, I was like, oh, the second they came out of the mirror, I'm like, anything's up for grabs now in this movie.
Yeah.
And it was just so inventive the way they shot it and did it, everything, and just I know he's not really drinking that steaming water, but every time he does, I wince. It works. It works really good for me.
Yeah. So good.
Speaking of that last, this could just be the age that I saw this, but you know, like I said, I saw this when I was a teenager, which was in the 2000s, and I was probably like 2004-ish. Lord of the Rings was very big. I know these two guys are buddies. I see a lot of Helm's Deep framing in this last Deadeye sequence. I know obviously it's sillier and we have little skeleton men, but everything from the ladders going up, I was just like, I remember seeing Two Towers and then seeing this movie a year later and just being like, man, I bet, like, I'm just saying, I bet he watched it and he was like, there's some good ways to frame a battle here. I've always seen a little bit of connection there.
Yeah, my wife loves Lord of the Rings. They're her favorite films. So like putting that into perspective, the way that you're talking about that, I can 100% see that. And given the fact that both Jackson and Raimi come from the world of like weird independent cinema,
Yeah.
like I I really really admire that comparison, and that's
Yeah, I've
really
never
well
read it
done.
anywhere, but I would bet my money that Sam Jackson, like, he's like, I've seen it, you know.
We're gonna
Yeah.
frame it just like Army of Darkness, and it's gonna
Yeah.
be great, and no one will ever know except for Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time I ever watched this movie, like again, I was in my early 20s and just starting to get into horror. This might have been one of my first horror comedies, and I just remember laughing so hard and having such a good time. And like I grew up being scared of ET. Like that's what I was, I had to watch that whole first opening scene of ET eating the peanut butter Reese's Pieces because I was just so terrified. But like I just love this movie of how fun it is, the gore obviously, and uh yeah, just some awesome practical effects and that part where he's here and his the other is like coming out of the side of him and
Yep.
like he has to react being both is insane. Yeah, Bruce Campbell, like I know he's like a god to us horror junkies, but like I don't know. I hope, and maybe with him being in, I know he's just a very tiny cameo in Doctor Strange. Maybe more people will be like, oh, let's go check him out. But yeah, he's just his physical comedy is like, I don't know, up there with some of the greats ever.
Yeah,
So
like I'm almost surprised that like this movie didn't make him like a bigger uh name in like physical comedy, because I feel like
yeah.
this is an era where you're starting to kind of get out of like Bill Murray and like Dan Aykroyd. Like you're starting to kind of get into that like Adam Sandler, Chris Rock, Chris Farley, like a lot of the Saturday Night Live guys. Like I would have loved to see Bruce Campbell like team up with like Chris Farley. Like I think the two of
Oh
them would have
yeah.
made like an incredible like physical comedy that would have been on like the horror movie version of like Night at the Roxbury. Like would have
Yeah.
just been like the two of them, I think would have just had like great chemistry and great timing. But it is like
Yeah.
really surprising that like even after all these years, like the name Bruce Campbell is like still known to most people as like a cult status name.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think we kind of talked about it in one of the previous episodes, but like, yeah, he all his projects tend to have really strong fan bases, but it's always considered a bit cult. Like I don't watch Burn Notice, but I know there's a very loyal fan base to that TV show, and they love Bruce Campbell for that. And Masha grew up watching Xena the Warrior Princess, so she knows him as that character. So she just always refers to him. I don't remember his name, but every time I watch him, she calls him that name. So yeah, he has like tons of loyal fan bases, but everything's just a little bit different. Evil Dead's not quite the same as Xena, not quite the same as Burn. So yeah, I feel like he's never gotten that full mainstream just pop where we all feel like he deserves.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I feel like maybe I mean I think we talked about this in Evil Dead too. I feel like that's maybe the way that he wanted it because you
Mm.
see the way that he also interacts with like fans, like watching videos of him at South by Southwest recently to promote Evil Dead Rise, and like he just seems like one of the most like kind, just like warm, welcoming guys you could ever meet. I think that like by him taking on smaller projects over the years or smaller films at least, and then television shows, it's allowed him to kind of like stay to the ground, not only introduce himself to new audiences, but also at the same time like keep like interacting with the one that like made him famous to begin with.
Yeah, and he has such a presence about him. Like I know he does like a game show now too, like when he goes to conventions, and I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's really cool. And he just deeply cares about everybody who's given him, like the love and respect he deserves. And even on Twitter, like he'll comment and and is it him? I don't know, but still the fact that he makes it a priority of like commenting on fan art and you know, having fun moments with his fans and stuff. You don't have to do that. And most actors don't do that. But I've got to have like I used to oh man, a long time ago, 2017, I used to be part of the film crew for Wizard World Comic Con, and they would like travel and do like traveling conventions, and he was there, and like I literally was just a film guy, but like he was sitting there eating lunch alone, and we were told not to talk to them, but he like I literally grabbed a plate and there was like to eat and there was nowhere else to sit, and he literally was just like, "Hey guy," and pointed down where the seat was in front of him. And so I got to sit there and just eat with him. And yeah, he was just a really chill dude. And just like, he had to leave in like 15 minutes, but like, and I didn't bring up how much of a fan I was because I didn't want to, that's what he was getting all day at a convention. But he probably could tell because I was smiling as I was eating my food. So yeah.
That's so cool. I love to hear that. I've obviously never met him, but anytime you adore someone and you hear some cool stories like that, it always kind of helps. I
Yeah.
like that a lot.
And I'm also pumped that he told off that random person at South by. Have you heard me see that
Yes.
too, dude? That was awesome.
I don't think I saw this. What is this?
So they did the South by Southwest premiere of Evil Dead Rise, and some guy like stands up. This is viral video. This guy was just like, "This movie effing sucked." Bruce Campbell was like, "Get the F out of here." And they're just like,
Nice.
like stop rooting for everyone else, and,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
kind of, I think that speaks to the character and like character of him, but also at the same time, like we don't have a whole lot of things within this franchise the way that we do, like Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees.
Yeah.
I think it really speaks to the quality of these projects. The fact that you look at like the Evil Dead in 81, you look at Evil Dead 2 in 87, and then 5 years later you get Army of Darkness. Then it's like almost like over 20 years
Yeah, I
after
think
we
2013 is the remake, I think.
Yeah,
yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, like now, 10 years after that is when we get, Evil Dead Rise. And between that, we had the Ash versus Evil Dead series. But I think the fact that they take their time with this instead of just trying to like pump out content, it
Hmm.
really speaks to the love and the care that not only he has for the series, but also Sam Raimi, because I feel like there's a lot of we talked about this when we did your show, Andy, where we talked about Halloween. Like Halloween has by the I think when we recorded it was 12 movies altogether. Now
Yeah,
it's
we did it
now it's
before.
13.
Yeah, we did it before Kills or Ends, I mean.
Yeah, and like that now I feel like there are so many low points, and I love Halloween. Don't get me wrong. Clearly I have it right behind me. And I have Michael Myers tattooed on me, and like I I love that series, but there are definite low points in that series. Whereas Evil Dead, like because you have everything so different from one another, like I would argue that it's very clearly one of the best franchises within the genre.
Yeah, I would say because I feel like if you don't like one of them, it's mostly because it boils down to that not being the kind of film you like. So like I know some people who don't like the remake because of just how gory and like hardcore it is, and like they're just like I don't like hardcore movies like that. But like it's not a it's by no means is it a badly made film. And then like last week, Josh, you were talking how Evil Dead 2 is not necessarily your cup of tea, because the horror comedy is such a hard thing to hit, and sometimes it doesn't always work for everybody. So, but like, I don't think, yeah, and none of these are bad. It just all boils down to
Mhm.
personal style, I think, or personal preference. And
Yeah.
actually, sorry, Josh, I'm actually curious because I didn't know what your opinion on this was going to be. We're going through these, in real time.
Yeah, yeah.
And because you were pretty, like, not harsh on Evil Dead 2, but like the horror comedy didn't really work for you so much there. Do you know why it works for you here as opposed to the last one?
I think because the horror aspects of this film just feel so much less.
Yeah.
For one, and for two, there's an originality to this one to where it kind of almost feels like they took the outline of the Evil Dead and they're like, all right, we're gonna condense the entire film and then kind of make it slapsticky
It's almost a
along the
parody.
way.
It's not a parody,
Yeah.
but like they're almost like we're gonna make a parody of our first film, similar to Texas 2 in some ways.
Yeah, and I like again, I love Texas. I love the first one and I love Texas too. Like, don't get me wrong, but I think for this film the reason that it works so much is because it just like doesn't hold back and it just goes into the comedy like it knows what it wants to be.
Yeah,
And that's
and
why
it's
I
never
have
shy.
like
Yeah,
yeah, and that's why I have like so much fun with this movie is because like I think it goes back to what Watson was saying earlier, like the one lines in this, like this is my boomstick, hail to the king, baby.
Yeah.
Like there's so many like good like quips that Ash has in this movie that I feel like that's what really likes, and like also I feel like this is the movie that really shaped the Ash that we now know. Like
for
I
sure.
definitely agree with that. Yeah.
the scene in particular that like it's him and the wise man where he brings back the Necronomicon. He's like, "Did you say the exact words exactly?" And he goes, "I may have like I didn't say them to the like exactly the syllables, no, but I mostly got it right." And like it's that kind of thing that I feel like this movie does really well. And it like really just leans into that comedy. And I think also too by like setting it in. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but like medieval movies to me have this timeless quality about them, especially
Mm.
like medieval comedy. Like when I watch Mighty Python or like Princess Bride, because those are the two I brought up earlier, and even this one, I never feel like I'm watching a movie from the 70s, 80s, or 90s. I always feel like I'm watching a movie that's like not doesn't fall victim to time.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I think, yeah, and especially if they like it's just so fun and not easily, sorry, I shouldn't say easily, but it's something that we're all familiar with, right? That time period. And I think it's easy to like believe that. I keep saying easy, but I know if I made a medieval movie, it'd be hella hard. So,
Yeah, and I've
but
seen some medieval comedies I don't enjoy also. So it's all
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't like to call the ones I don't like out, but yeah,
No, for
it can be
sure.
hard.
But no, I definitely get what you mean. There's a fun, timeless like aspect to them that really makes them believable and enjoyable. And yeah, and Monty Python, I mean, yeah, like you just can never just such good moments and just like medieval moments. Yeah, and I just love medieval shit in general.
Yeah,
So
and it works too because this movie was smart enough to know that the reason a lot of it's funny is how serious everybody takes it outside of Ash. Like they all play it
exactly.
very straight. His love interest plays
Right.
it straight. The king plays it straight. Like they're not all winking at the camera as well. It's kind of like Ash is the weird one, and they
Hmm.
knew that that would be enough for the comedy inside of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So
which yeah, it's like I've been like trying to like think about like the mental health like twist of this throughout,
Can't
and
wait.
I think like to a degree, like one of the things that I complained about in Evil Dead 2 is like just the fact that like I think Ash works better when he's like with people. Like, don't get me wrong, like I think some of the sequences were, with the hand and some of the stuff in Evil Dead like 2 like works, but I feel like for here, like given the fact that he is able to bounce one-liners and like have like real-time conversations off of like characters like Sheila and like the Wise Men and even Duke Henry the Red and like all of these like other characters for as minor as they might be, I think it highlights the importance, especially in Ash's case, about him being this like guy that's essentially like out of his element and like out of his time. And sometimes I think that like we have this capability of being, I don't necessarily want to say like shut down, but like being comfortable in your own skin,
mm,
because that's one of the things that like no matter how many times I see this is like Ash clearly does not fit in whatsoever. Like it's not the fact that he has a quote unquote boomstick or that he fell out of the sky or that he's the prophecy of the chosen one. It's that like he doesn't know anything and know anyone in this time period. And so you have this fish out of water story, but yet he's remaining true to who he is. And I think that like there has to be this degree of like remaining comfortable in your skin, regardless of where you are.
yeah. I'd agree with that, and you could probably make some kind of parallel with that with like Evil Ash, right? Like, we kind of have to deal with that with ourselves every once in a while, and like not there's a part of us I think that we don't really love, and we think, oh, we can just like get rid of it, but then I know this might be a little stretching, but then it becomes a giant army. I don't know, but I like that because Ash, one of my favorite moments too is actually the very end when Ash is back at this as a store clerk, or not a store clerk, a cashier, and like he's just gone through that whole thing and like even then, has he changed? Not really. He's himself, and he's true to himself, and you know and it ends, I think, on I'm trying to remember exactly what he says at the end, but another great one liner, probably groovy. uh yeah, such
I
a good
mean,
movie.
to your point though, like you talked about it like becoming this like army if you don't like if something is like within yourself is like recognized as like being something that's toxic to your mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So like depression obviously is going to be the gateway into much more harmful things like substance abuse, alcoholism,
Yeah,
self-mutilation, and even ultimately could be a suicide. So like that brings in the conversation of, to bring it back to Bundy Manor, like the importance
mm-hmm.
of therapy and like being vulnerable within yourself to like acknowledge that you have a problem and that you need help. And I think that's one of the things that like, you know, for Ash, that's also a learning that I think that he has to learn, and that, Lord Arthur also has to learn is like, we don't have the capability to handle the evil, the army of the Deadites, but Ash knows someone who does, and so it's okay. We're gonna team up, and we're gonna do team up with Duke Henry the Red's army, and so you're gonna essentially
Yeah,
have two neighboring enemies like coming together for the common good.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
I
great
can see
point.
that. I don't even think that's too much of a stretch because it's also just down to like Ash is very greedy in the beginning and doesn't want to help them at all. It just wants to help himself, and then it's through the evil person coming out, and then it is him training everybody to fight together even before the other army comes in. So yeah, I think that is kind of just like even just as simple as knowing when to rely on your neighbor, or a friend or anything like that.
Yeah, and I know we're talking serious, but the training montage where the wise man is like trying to get around to the gunpowder for the first time, and he like brings it to the fire. It still gets me every time.
Yeah,
So good. So good.
yeah. It was weird to get as serious as we just got for this movie because like as in my head I just picture Ash's head getting elongated and just like how silly London Bridge is falling down and everything.
But
But it is a great time.
yeah, man. So I think that is gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. So if you guys got a chance to see Bundy Manor at Horrific Hope, let us know what you guys thought about it, or uh if you guys didn't, where can people find you online, Watson, and follow the film's journey?
Yeah, so you could follow me personally at Waddy McFly. I'll be posting that journey. We actually are scoring distribution, so you will be seeing it very soon. We're just getting deliverables up. So you guys might be our last festival, which is sad, but that ultimately is what happens. And but yeah, you can follow our production company on TikTok and Instagram at JWatt Films. As well as, like I said, we're gearing up for our next movie. So obviously, please check out Bundy Manor when that comes out. But then, if you want like to be a part of the process for the next one, demonetizefilm.com. Sign up, and yeah, it's gonna be great. So, yeah, that's me.
Well, I'm excited. And you're always welcome back at Horrific Hope. So keep
Thank
this
you.
in mind when you guys are looking around.
Totally.
Andy, where can people follow you online?
As always, you guys can follow me at my other podcast, Love What I Love. That's at LWIL Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And come join us out for some movie discussions.
Yeah, so you guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. I'm over on occasionally making TikToks if TikTok is still around by the time this episode drops.
That's a good point.
Gent Ghostface, GENT. And you guys can follow us, Abyss Gazing, wherever you guys get your podcast from. And you guys can, of course, check out our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcast from. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch. And until next time, remember that the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.